The Sega Genesis was released in the United States back on August 14th, 1989. So, in honor of it bursting onto the scene 37 years ago today, I've put together this retrospective compilation video about the console, its games, and how it forged a new path in 16-bit gaming. Think you know the Genesis? Then be sure to stick around to the end as we explore all of the details behind this remarkable console. In the first segment, we'll take a close-up look at the hardware itself, along with some of the best games and cool accessories that Sega produced, and a fierce battle with Nintendo during the console wars. I'll also share some of my favorite memories of playing it back when it first came out, before there was anything retro about it. Next, we'll take a closer look at what many consider to be the best game on the system, in my review of the incredible beat-em-up, Streets of Rage 2. And finally, we'll wrap up with a deep dive into the world of Sega's mascot, Sonic the Hedgehog, in my definitive ranking of all of the 16-bit Sonic games. The Genesis is one of my all-time favorite retro consoles, so I really hope you'll enjoy this video which explains what makes it so special. Now, let's jump into it.
Is the Sega Genesis really as good as I remember? There was nothing like the advancement in gaming during the change from 8-bit to 16-bit consoles. The advent of 4th-generation gaming was one of the biggest step changes in video gaming history. Back in the 80s, great consoles like the NES and Sega Master System had some excellent games but were still quite limited due to their rudimentary graphics and sound. The most impressive games at the time were often still found at your local arcade. When computing power and consumer electronics began to increase during the late 80s, Sega blazed a trail by launching its powerful new system and wowing gamers who demanded more. When I think back to that time, I often ask myself, is it just my own feelings of nostalgia? Or was the Sega Genesis really as good as I remember it to be? So join me in this Retro Gaming Boss exploration of this groundbreaking console to answer the question as we look at its amazing games and the impact it had on popular culture and video game history. To start this review, we need to jump into our retro time machine and travel back 36 years to 1989. Back then, the tunes of Milli Vanilli and Madonna were playing non-stop on the radio, and movies like Batman and Indiana Jones were packing the theaters. In gaming, Super Mario Bros. 3 and Tetris were also just released on the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System. Against this backdrop, the Sega Genesis, also known as the Mega Drive outside of North America, was first launched in Japan in 1988, and later in North America in August of 1989. During the system's reign, it maintained a strong presence with gamers for nearly a decade. While the Genesis wasn't Sega's first home console, it became the company's flagship device, marking the beginning of the 16-bit era in video games and escalating its battle with Nintendo for gaming dominance. The Genesis brought significant advances in graphics and sound, and introduced the public to classic franchises that continue to shape the gaming world today. In this video, we'll take an objective look at just how good the Genesis really was, by examining its most important characteristics. We'll begin by checking out some of the system's most iconic games, and then take a look under the hood at the technical specs of the 16-bit powerhouse. And finally, we'll measure its overall impact by comparing it to the competition and assessing its lasting legacy on gaming. So before we dive into it, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is always here for a quick retro gaming break, whenever you need it. I appreciate your support, since it's the only way that YouTube will highlight my videos. Going straight to what matters most, we have to start with the games. The Sega Genesis library contains over 900 titles, with many considered to be masterpieces of their day and age that fueled the console's popularity and longevity. To illustrate the quality and breadth of the Genesis library, I need to highlight a number of standout games that are loved by fans and really showcase the variety and fun experience delivered by the console.
Excellent!
This includes a sampling across different genres, from platformers, shooters, and action titles to RPGs and sports games. The following list is not meant to be taken as the system's best games, however, each one provided a major contribution to the console's appeal and lasting influence. So buckle up as we do a quick speed round to recap some of the remarkable games on the Genesis. Sega's defining mascot, Sonic the Hedgehog, became synonymous with the console itself. The gameplay style offered players a colorful and energetic experience with high-speed, side-scrolling levels filled with loops and jumps in a kinetic environment. The game's bright graphics, fun characters, and iconic soundtrack help make it an instant classic. Phantasy Star 4. This game was far and away the best role-playing game ever made for the console. This title delivered a deep, engaging story alongside stunning visuals and a deep battle system. The game's visual style narrative tied together previous entities in the Phantasy Star series while remaining accessible to newcomers. Its art direction, world building, and music left a lasting impact on the RPG genre. Contra Hardcore. Known for its over-the-top action and vibrant visuals, Contra Hardcore was a run-and-gun shooter that pushed the Genesis to its absolute limits. With great co-op gameplay, fantastic boss battles, and stunning graphics, it is often thought to be one of the very best action games available on the Genesis. Arcade ports, Altered Beast, Golden Axe, Afterburner 2. One of Sega's greatest assets that it used to drive early adoption of the Genesis was an incredible batch of arcade ports that were exclusive on the console. Sega's launch hype for the Genesis focused heavily on bringing the arcade experience into the comfort of your own home. While the quality of the arcade ports varied from excellent to just so-so depending on the title, Golden Axe, Altered Beast, and Afterburner 2 were all quite good, even if not perfect mirrors of the original arcade experience. Castlevania Bloodlines marked a shift in the Castlevania series from its 8-bit roots to the more powerful 16-bit system. This action platformer was unique because it featured two different playable characters, each with their own abilities, in a quest to stop Dracula's resurrection. The game retained the series' signature dark, gothic atmosphere while offering tight, responsive controls and challenging gameplay. With impressive visuals and a haunting soundtrack, Bloodlines remains another of the most revered action games on the Genesis. Madden NFL 94 was actually released in 1993 as part of the iconic Madden NFL series, which became hugely popular on the console. Madden NFL 94 was particularly notable for introducing features like the NFL license and real player names, which helped cement its place as a sports lover's dream and become one of the top-selling games of the era. The Madden NFL series continues to be a dominant force in sports gaming over the years, and this game helped differentiate the Sega Genesis from the competition.
Set! 20! Green! But!
Shining Force 2 is another RPG entry considered by many to be the best tactical RPG on the system. Shining Force 2 offered a compelling, turn-based strategy experience that offered more depth than many of the action-oriented titles on the Genesis. Players controlled a group of heroes as they embarked on a journey to stop a dark force threatening their kingdom. The game was praised for its accessible mechanics, beautifully designed pixel art, fun combat system, and engaging story. This series would go on to influence many tactical RPGs in the years that followed. Earthworm Jim was an innovative and visually stunning platformer that combined a unique main character, a cartoonish earthworm with a cybernetic supersuit, with challenging gameplay and a quirky sense of humor. Known for its hand-drawn animation and fluid style, Earthworm Jim featured imaginative level design and was praised for its creativity and overall polish, and its bizarre sense of humor which still resonates with fans today. Echo the Dolphin was a unique action-adventure game that combined underwater exploration and puzzle solving. In this innovative title, players controlled a dolphin navigating underwater environments to uncover a mysterious threat. The game felt so different than the other types of genres which preceded it, and heightened the appeal of the console to a broader audience. Street Fighter II Special Championship Edition brought the famous arcade fighting game home to the console, featuring classic characters and intense bare-knuckle one-on-one combat, with crisp graphics and smooth gameplay. It was an unforgettable addition to the Genesis library. Thunder Force 4 was a visually striking, side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, praised for its fast-paced action and impressive graphics. This game showed off the system's ability to create some incredible visual effects, highlighting what Sega's 16-bit Colossus was capable of rendering on screen. Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master delivered thrilling ninja action with its fluid animation, action, and impressive background, setting it apart with its combination of traditional platforming and ninja combat. And finally, Vector Man offered an innovative 2D platforming experience with its futuristic setting and robot protagonist. What made this one special is its crisp, pre-rendered graphics and dynamic, action-packed gameplay. With such an extensive library and variety of top-notch games, there's no way I could go through all of them in this video, so I'm curious about what you think are the best games on the Genesis. Leave a comment below and let's compare notes. Here's my personal experience from way back in '89. My friends and I were all so excited from the hype leading up to the console's release. When it first came out, we had to settle with playing the demo unit set out at the local JCPenney store. And then when my friend finally got a Genesis of his own, I remember feeling so lucky hanging out and playing the amazing launch titles together. Classics like Altered Beast, Phantasy Star 2, Pat Riley's Basketball, and of course, Afterburner 2. Yeah, life sure felt amazing back in those days, especially when we pulled some all-nighters, feeling like a king, passing through the hours guzzling Mountain Dew and powering up with a bunch of cheap frozen pizzas. I gotta say, those were the days.
Power up!
But really, it's actually kind of hard to even explain how awesome it felt when playing these games for the very first time, right at the dawn of the 16-bit era. I had no idea that experience would become history in the making, but I knew for certain that the major improvements in graphics and sound on the Genesis were definitely something to behold. You have to remember that back then, there was nothing retro about this system at all. It was hardcore, state-of-the-art, powerful video gaming technology at its peak. And I'll never forget the sense of wonder I felt during those moments. And would guess that you might also have some fun memories of Sega's remarkable console of your own. So of course, I still come back to the Genesis from time to time for a hit of gaming nostalgia, and honestly I have to say I'm still very impressed with the creativity of many of its games, including the graphics, animation, sound, and gameplay. For 2D gaming, the Genesis has always been such a blast to play, and deserves to be one of every retro gamer's core systems. Now after playing these great Genesis games, I often ask myself, what kind of electronic wizardry was going on under the hood of the console that produced such cool games? The Genesis featured a Motorola 68000 microprocessor clocking in at 7.6 MHz, with a Zilog Z80 audio controller running at 3.58 MHz. So while this chipset had just a fraction of the capabilities of those found in your modern-day phones, back in '89, it represented a significant leap forward in terms of processing power compared to its contemporaries. This allowed the Genesis to deliver smoother gameplay, big sprites on screen, and some awesome parallax scrolling effects. They all came together to produce way better graphics than the prior generation of consoles. With a color palette of 512 total colors and the ability to display 64 colors on screen at a time, its 16-bit processing architecture offered sharp visuals and smoother animation, giving it an edge over its 8-bit competitors such as the Nintendo Entertainment System. The system was also equipped with 64 KB of RAM and another 64 KB of video RAM, which supported a variety of new graphical effects. The sound was handled by a specialized Yamaha YM2612 chip, producing its hallmark frequency modulation audio. With its distinctive music and sound effects, they became one of the console's most recognizable features. The Genesis even had a stereo audio headset jack on the front, which was quite a fancy feature back in the 80s. The stereo effect really sounded impressive in certain games too. Don't believe me? Put on your headphones now and take a listen for yourself. Additionally, the Sega Genesis boasted a number of peripheral devices that demonstrated Sega's willingness to experiment with new hardware in an effort to expand the capabilities of the console. Among these were backwards compatibility with the 8-bit Sega Master System with its power-based converter, which came in really handy for proud owners of the SMS like me. The Sega CD was a compact disc add-on that expanded the system's audio and graphics capabilities by providing full-motion video and CD-quality soundtracks that resulted in more cinematic gameplay experiences. Sega also offered specialized controllers with unique features like the 6-button joystick and gamepad for enthusiasts of fighting games. And who could forget the ill-fated 32X, which allowed the Genesis to show off 32-bit graphics, albeit with mixed results and a poor reception that sealed its inevitable fate. Out of all the Sega Genesis peripherals, to me, the one that provided the greatest benefits to gamers was the Sega CD, but I'll come back to that one in another video. I've also got to share my personal view about the aesthetic design of the console itself. Before the Genesis, both the NES and SMS had blocky and angular form factors, both those consoles themselves and their controllers. In fact, even older systems like the Atari 2600 and ColecoVision used a similar rectangular, straight-edge form. When the Genesis was introduced, I was immediately blown away with its more organic form and smooth, curved surfaces. The center ring of the console and comfortable, natural shape of the controller seemed light years ahead of the prior consoles from a design standpoint. And the addition of that third button on the controller just opened up so many new possibilities for gameplay and interaction. So while it's easy to overlook this aspect today, back in its time, the Genesis was a gorgeous and futuristic-looking gaming machine. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this content, I've included a playlist in the description below of my other videos that you might also enjoy. So why not check them out and stick around for a while? So there's no doubt the Sega Genesis had a profound effect on the gaming industry in terms of its technical innovations and epic library of games. And in my view, one of its biggest impacts was how it shifted the gaming industry towards a more complex, serious, and mature-themed games. One of the things that drew me towards the Genesis in the first place was how its games were more gritty and intense than many Nintendo titles. Many Genesis titles presented themselves with a real edge. For example, I remember playing the Genesis arcade port of Mortal Kombat, which included actual red blood and the same gruesome fatalities that were pulled straight from the original. By way of comparison, that was something that was actually censored on the Super Nintendo version. So while we might laugh now at how basic this seems, trust me, it was a big deal at the time, and there was actually a lot of controversy in the news about violence in video games, which actually led to the implementation of a video game rating system, similar to what was in place for movies.
Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis. When I was dead broke, man, I couldn't picture this.
The popularity of the Genesis also fueled the console war between Sega and Nintendo, the former trying to position itself as the extreme alternative brand through its aggressive advertising campaigns, most notably its buzzworthy blast processing ads, and their Genesis does what Nintendon't slogan. So say what you will about the marketing gimmicks of those days, but this rivalry helped bring about loads of innovation that was tremendous for gamers, since each company pushed the other to develop new technologies that resulted in better gaming experiences. This fierce competition resulted in further growth of the industry that in turn popularized gaming as a mainstream force in entertainment. Sega also did an excellent job increasing the number of third-party developers that signed up to create games for the Genesis. Due to the system's advanced technology, it was able to attract a larger number of third-party developers, leading to its broader and more diverse game library. A final facet of how good the Sega Genesis really was is how it compares to its biggest competition, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, that was released in the US in August of 1991, 2 years after the Genesis. The introduction of the Super Nintendo debuted some new hardware that gave it some advantages that made it a tough competitor, an amazing system in its own right. There's no denying the Super Nintendo featured superior sound capabilities, thanks to its custom-designed audio chipset that introduced Sony's digital signal processor, which created higher fidelity music and sound effects than the Genesis. While the Yamaha chip in the Genesis brought to life some killer soundtracks, especially its hard rock and electronic techno themes, The Super Nintendo is often praised for its clear-sounding, nuanced, and orchestral music. The Super Nintendo also showcased its Mode 7 hardware-accelerated scaling and rotation of background layers, with this additional horsepower giving it a visual edge in games like Super Mario Kart, F-Zero, and Pilot Wings. In comparison, the Genesis was also able to produce similar effects. However, this was cleverly done in software rather than natively via hardware. For example, in the epic boss battles in Contra Hardcore. But in my eyes, these effects on the Genesis somehow never seem to quite be as smooth or fluid as those on the Super Nintendo, even though, I have to say, they still look pretty awesome. I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Both consoles also began pushing the boundaries of real-time 3D graphics by incorporating specialized geometry processor chips on board cartridges, but only on a small number of titles. Virtua Racing on the Genesis was a reasonably good port of the popular arcade game that demonstrated the power of the Sega Virtua processing chip, while Nintendo's 3DFX chip was well known for Star Fox, its brilliant 3D space shooter. Some might argue that the Super Nintendo may have had a slight edge with its game library, featuring some of the most beloved first-party titles ever made, such as The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Super Mario World, and Super Metroid. But as we saw in the earlier recap, many Genesis games were no joke and were also exceptionally good, breaking new ground and showing the world all that gaming could be. Sega's superb franchises and well-rounded variety of genres really set it apart and made it something truly special. I mean, just look at the success of Sonic the Hedgehog as a cultural icon today, with numerous new game releases over the years and the ultra-popular movie series, even decades after it first debuted on the Genesis. So going back to our main question, was the Sega Genesis really as good as I remember it? When I tally up the score from taking this objective look back, I have to say uncategorically and confidently that yes, the Sega Genesis was indeed a console that was ahead of its time and offered groundbreaking tech, with a library of stunning, memorable games. While it fought against the stiff competition from the Super Nintendo, Sega's ability to push the boundaries of gaming made it an undeniable force in the early 1990s console wars. There's never been a better time to answer the question about the Genesis for yourself. And if you didn't have a chance to play it back in the late 80s or early 90s, then go do yourself a favor and make this console your new hobby. Just be sure to thank me later. But that's just what I think. How would you rate the Genesis? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your views. Don't forget to hit that like button and share this video. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. I invite you to subscribe for more feel-good retro gaming content. Alright everyone, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out, reminding you to keep your games old school and enjoy that 16-bit Sega magic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.
There's a small handful of video games that are so absurdly good, they feel like they shouldn't exist. Like, the developers somehow broke the rules of what a 16-bit cartridge could do, and no one told them to stop. Streets of Rage 2 is one of those games. It's the rare sequel that doesn't only surpass the original, it absolutely demolishes it. And today, I'm going to show you exactly why this 1992 Sega Genesis classic is one of the most perfectly crafted action games ever made. We're talking about the razor-sharp combat, a legendary soundtrack, and mind-blowing visuals, and a few behind-the-scenes stories that'll make you appreciate this masterpiece even more, so let's jump in. So the setup is classic beat-em-up stuff. Mr. X, the crime boss you thought you defeated in the first game, is back. And this time, he's kidnapped Adam, one of the original 3 playable characters in the first game. So it's up to Axel and Blaze, along with 2 new faces, to hit the streets and get him back. Now, Sega could have just recycled the same great gameplay, but they instead went a few steps further. While the original game had 3 playable characters, the differences between them were pretty minor. But this time, the developers made sure each of the 4 characters felt completely unique. You have Axel, your standard all-arounder with the fastest punch speed. then Blaze, who is more agile. But the two new characters are where the real fun begins. You have Max, a slow-moving but incredibly powerful wrestler who can just obliterate enemies. And then there's Skate, Adam's younger brother, who fights on rollerblades and is all about speed and trick maneuvers. No two play alike, hell, no two even play similar. And here's a piece of trivia that most don't know. The decision to cut Adam from the playable roster and replace him with these new characters, that was a deliberate choice. In a developer interview, the game's lead designer and artist, Ayano Koshiro, actually admitted that she was the one responsible for Adam's disappearance. She felt that Adam didn't really have a specialty, so they decided to swap him out for characters that were more distinct. And you know what? That was the right call. Now, as someone who loved Adam in the first game, I understand the need to have him in this game as part of the story, but wish that he still could have been an unlockable character. To remove him entirely was a downer, but I guess it gave the sequel a fresh feel and made the character selection screen a lot more interesting. What you might not realize is just how much control Ayano had over the entire game. I mean, she was only 22 years old when she designed and art directed most of Streets of Rage 2. Think about that. What were you up to when you were 22? She came up with the character designs, the special moves, and even the damage parameters for every attack. It was a massive undertaking for someone so young, and it's really impressive how she just made it look easy, knocking it out of the park. Now, let's talk about the fighting, because this is where Streets of Rage 2 really separates itself from the pack. On the surface, it looks like a simple beat-em-up, where you just mash the attack button, and sure, you do plenty of that, but there's a surprising amount of depth under the hood. The first game had a special attack that was basically calling in a police car to clear the screen. For the sequel, they completely overhauled that system. Sega decided to axe the call for police backup, and instead, it gave us a new special attack system. Each character has their own unique special move you can perform. Alex has his iconic dragon uppercut. Blaze has her own devastating attack, and these moves are powerful, but they cost a little bit of your health to use, so you have to be strategic about when you pull them out. Use them at the right moment, and they can save your life, but use them recklessly, and you're just digging your own grave. The fighting mechanics were vastly improved across the board. Every attack lands with a perfect smack, a satisfying stun, and ultimately your foe collapsing to the ground in a screen-shaking defeat. You can chain combos together much better now, and you can even juggle enemies in the air if you time your attacks right. In fact, the game's creators were heavily influenced by Street Fighter II during its development. They loved it so much that they bought an arcade cabinet and installed it in their office. The team wanted the fights in Streets of Rage 2 to have a similar flow. 2 jabs, followed by a straight punch, then a heavy hit that sends the enemy flying. And you can really feel that influence when you're playing. The combat has a rhythm to it that makes every encounter just so damn satisfying. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The enemies aren't just punching bags either. The game gives every single enemy a health bar and a name. You can finally see how much damage you're doing and how close you are to taking down that big bruiser. And seriously, the variety of enemies you face is incredible. You have Muay Thai kickboxers, huge baseball players who do belly flops, kung fu masters, and even lunatics with jetpacks. The game constantly throws new threats at you, and the boss fights are super memorable and challenging. Some bad guys can block your regular attacks, some can power right through your specials, and some can even counter you before you can even land a first punch. That variety and depth is why this game never gets boring. Alright, so you know we've got to talk about the music. If there's one thing that Streets of Rage 2 is famous for, it's the soundtrack. And honestly, it might be the single greatest feature of the game. Yuzo Koshiro, Ayano's brother, composed the music. And he didn't just approach the music as mere background tunes. He created an electronic, techno, jazz rock fusion that completely takes center stage. The music is so good that it's considered by many as one of the greatest video game soundtracks of all time, myself included. And I mean, the first game itself had an incredible soundtrack, so it was only right for him to return and make those sweet tunes that your ears just love in this part 2. What makes it so special is how Yuzo created it. He used the Yamaha FM synth sound chip of the Sega Genesis, along with an NEC PC-88 computer and his own audio programming language called Music Love. He was influenced by the club music of the early 90s, house, techno, breakbeat, and even R&B. He wanted to be the first to introduce those sounds to video game music, and he succeeded. Tracks like Back into Industry and Max Man sound like they belong in a trendy Berlin disco, not in a 16-bit video game. The soundtrack has become part of the game's identity and is really like the soul of the game. It sets the tone for the entire experience, and it makes the gameplay somehow feel even more satisfying. Here's a couple clips for you to hear for yourself and enjoy. And another cool detail for you. The sound effects are equally as brilliant as the music. The thumps of every punch, the death cries of enemies, and the sound of a weapon connecting. It all adds to the visceral feel of the combat. Yuzo Koshiro was clearly ahead of his time, and his work on this game is a huge reason why it's still so beloved today. Next, let's take a moment to appreciate how good this game looks. The first game came on a tiny 4 megabit cartridge. Streets of Rage 2 here clocks in on a comparatively massive 16 megabits, a full 4 times increase in size. Sega needed all that extra memory because they wanted to make this new entry as stunning as they possibly could. The character sprites are significantly larger and more detailed than in the first game. It's obvious to see how the team used every bit of that extra cartridge space. The characters are big, beautifully animated, and have tons of personality. The environments are incredibly varied too. You fight through city streets, amusement parks, factories, and more. The backgrounds are packed with detail, and there are some neat new touches like foreground scrolling and some nice line and parallax effects. It makes for a heck of a lot to see and experience, making the first game seem like it was behind a generation. The technical side of things is also impressive. The game runs at a smooth 30 frames per second, which was standard for the time. And get this, when M2, the studio that handled the 3DS port, first saw the original code, they thought it would be impossible to port because the characters were so large. That just shows how ambitious the original development team was. And one thing that always stood out to me is how the game uses its difficulty. It is challenging, but it never feels unfair. The AI is significantly improved over the first game. Enemies will try to surround you, they'll block your attacks, and they'll definitely punish you if you get too greedy. It automatically forces you to think about your positioning and your strategy. And as you get further into the game, earlier bosses start showing up as regular enemies. It's a great way to show your progression and make you feel like you've really become a powerful fighter. So why does Streets of Rage 2 still matter today? Well, for starters, it's widely considered the best entry in the entire series and one of the greatest beat-em-ups ever made. It took everything that made the first game good and improved upon it in every single way. It perfected the formula. The legacy of this game is undeniable. Whether you grew up a Sega fan or not, the quality of this game's programming is god-tier level. But even more than that, it represents a special moment in gaming history, in my mind. The early 90s were the golden era for the beat-em-up genre. Arcades were full of them, and home consoles were finally powerful enough to deliver a similar experience. Streets of Rage 2 was Sega's answer to Capcom's Final Fight, and in many ways, it surpassed it. It proved that you didn't need an arcade cabinet to have a great brawler experience. You could have it right in your own living room. And that's a feeling a lot of us still chase today. That feeling of popping in a cartridge, grabbing a friend, and just having a blast. Streets of Rage 2 delivers that in spades. It's a game that's easy to pick up, but hard to put down. It's accessible enough for anyone to enjoy, but deep enough to keep you coming back for more. Sega only gave us one more game in the series, Part 3, before giving up on it completely, which is baffling. It would then take 26 more years before we finally received the next sequel, Streets of Rage 4, back in 2020, but all of that just makes this one even more special. So that's Streets of Rage 2, a game that even decades later still feels as thrilling and fun to play as it did back in 1992. The combat's so tight, the characters are memorable, the music is legendary, and the visuals still just look great. It's a masterclass in game design, and this game just did everything right. And I want to leave you with this thought. If you haven't played Streets of Rage 2 in a while, or if you never played it at all, do yourself a favor and fire it up. It's always an experience that is absolutely worth your time, and if you have played it, who was your main? Axel, Blaze, Max, or Skate? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your memories of this classic, and I really do read every single one. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Sega had one job in the early 90s, beat Nintendo. And to do that, they needed a mascot who had something Mario didn't, speed. Sonic the Hedgehog became that mascot, and for a few glorious years, the Genesis was the coolest console on the planet. But here's the thing about that era. Not every Sonic game was created equal. Some of them defined the console. Some of them were weird pinball experiments. And one of them required you to buy a completely separate add-on just to play it. So today, we're ranking every 16-bit Sonic game from the original, to the experiments, to the absolute peak of the entire franchise. And we're doing it the right way. S tier, A tier, B, C, D. You saw the thumbnail. You know what we're doing here. But this isn't just any list. My goal here is to objectively explain, from a gameplay perspective, why I ranked them as I have. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which games deserve a spot in your collection, and which ones you can safely leave in the attic. We're going to get into some of the specific details that you probably missed when you played these back in the day. So, let's boot up the console, blow on the cartridge for good luck, and get into it. You have to start with the original, 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog. If you were like me, seeing this game for the first time at a friend's house was a core memory. You saw that green hill zone, the bright blue sky, and that music, and it just felt like freedom. Now, when we rank this game today, where does it fall? I'm placing the original Sonic in the B tier. Let me explain. When you play it now, you notice it doesn't have the spin dash. That move didn't exist yet. You have to stop and roll into a ball manually, which slows down the momentum. Plus, the game has a few zones that are infamous for killing that speed. The pacing is weird. You go from the pure speed of Green Hill Zone to pumping the brakes in Marble Zone, so for me, that keeps it out of the top tier. Here's the thing that most modern players might miss about the water level though. The developers knew the water sections were slow and frustrating, but they designed them to make a specific kind of tension. They were testing if you could handle the platforming pressure in a slower environment. It was a design choice to prove that the game wasn't just about holding right to win. But the tricky part is, that choice makes it the hardest of the trilogy to go back to if you just want that pure speed fix. But you can't ignore its importance. The game didn't only sell the Genesis, it invented a new kind of momentum-based platforming. Without Sonic 1, we don't have any of the others. It's the foundation. Solid B tier, absolutely worth playing, but not the peak. So that's the origin story. Now, let's talk about the game that took that foundation and absolutely perfected the formula. We're moving on to the one that introduced a certain two-tailed fox.
Alright, so after the first Sonic, Sega went back to the drawing board, and in 1992, they released Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and honestly, this is the game that most people picture when they think old school Sonic. This is where we got the Spin Dash, which is a game changer. It's also where we met Tails. And the levels? Chemical Plant Zone is iconic for a reason. The music, the neon colors, the speed. It's burned into our brains. Now in the rankings, Sonic 2 is either number 1 or number 2 on almost every list. It usually fights for the top spot with our next entry. And for the sake of this ranking, I'm putting Sonic 2 in the A tier. Let me explain why, because I know some of you are already typing in the comments. Sonic 2 is arguably the most consistent game in the series. Its pacing is perfect. It builds up, then you have that insane final boss with the Death Egg. That's the payoff. The reason it's A tier and not S tier is simply because what came next took that formula and made it massive. Sonic 2 is a masterpiece, but the number 1 spot belongs to something even bigger, which brings us to the undisputed king, the best Sonic game on the Genesis. I'm talking about the combination of Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles using the lock-on technology. That's our S tier, the highest possible rank. If you had the lock-on cartridge as a kid, you knew you were holding on to something special. This wasn't merely a sequel, it was an event. This game is in the number 1 spot because of the sheer scale. We're talking about levels like Ice Cap Zone, Launch Base Zone, and the massive Sandopolis Zone. Here's what makes this different from Sonic 2. It's the narrative. There was an actual story here with cutscenes. It introduced Knuckles, and the gameplay? You had 3 characters with completely unique paths through the levels. Tails could fly, Knuckles could glide, and Sonic had the Insta-Shield. And if you got the Chaos Emeralds, you didn't just turn into Super Sonic, you got Hyper Sonic. It was the ultimate power fantasy. But here's the kicker. We need to talk about the standalone versions. If you had just Sonic 3 by itself, or just Sonic & Knuckles by itself, it didn't hit the same. The standalone Sonic 3 feels like half a game. It's massive and polished, but it ends on a cliffhanger. That version, I'm putting Sonic 3 on its own in the A tier. It's still excellent. Clearly a fantastic game, but it feels incomplete without the other half. And Sonic & Knuckles by itself? It's incredibly challenging, and the level design is oppressive, but it feels like it's missing the opening act. That one is in B tier on its own. Still a very good game, but you can feel the absence of Sonic 3's beginning. There's a clear synergy between the two when played together, and when you combine them using the lock-on technology, you get the full masterpiece, unquestionably S tier. So that's the top of the mountain, the big 3. But the Genesis had a weird life. After those classics, Sega started experimenting, and not all of those experiments were home runs. Let's look at the spin-offs. Before we get to the main spin-offs, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the CD add-on sitting under the console. I'm talking about Sonic CD. Now, technically, this game wasn't on a Genesis cartridge. It required the Sega CD attachment, but if we're talking about the 16-bit era of Sonic, you can't ignore this game. It's widely considered the peak of the 16-bit design philosophy, even if the hardware to run it was a little extra. Here's where this gets interesting. If I were ranking this against the Genesis cartridges, where would it land? I'm placing Sonic CD in the A tier. For a lot of fans, it sits right up there with Sonic 2. It introduced Metal Sonic, Amy Rose, and that incredible time travel mechanic where you could go to the past and future in each level. And the music, the soundtrack is legendary. The animation quality was also unlike anything else at the time. But here's what most people don't realize about Sonic CD. The game was designed around exploration, not pure speed. To get the good ending, you had to find the hidden generators in the past in every level. That really meant slowing down, searching every corner, and learning the levels inside and out. It was the opposite of the hold right to win style of Sonic 2. So if you went into it expecting the same rush as Chemical Plant, you might have been confused. It's a masterpiece, no doubt, high A tier. but because it requires the Sega CD add-on and plays so differently, I usually place it just below the perfection of the combined Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It's not S tier on the Genesis list, but it's absolutely essential playing for anyone who wants to understand what the full scope of Sonic was like in the 90s. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back to the cartridge-based experiments. Now, after Sonic 3 and Knuckles, the 16-bit era started to get a little weird. We had Sonic Spinball 1993. Now, this is a pinball platformer hybrid, and if you're like me, you had this game and you were probably super frustrated by it. I mean, the vibe is immaculate. The first level music is absolutely badass. The graphics are dark and industrial, but the game is brutally difficult. You're literally Sonic as the pinball. And if you don't hit the right bumpers to progress, you're stuck. It's more frustrating than it is fun, so I've got to put Sonic Spinball in the C tier. It usually sits in the lower half of the rankings because while it's unique, it lacks the speed we came for. Not terrible, but not something you revisit that often. And then we have Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. Look, it's a fantastic puzzle game. The competitive nature of dropping beans on your opponent is great. But is it really a Sonic game? I don't know. It's a fun distraction, but it's not a platformer. This goes into the B tier as a puzzle game. And if you judge it on its own merits, it's actually pretty good. But if you came for a Sonic experience, you might be disappointed. And then we get to the bottom of the barrel. Sonic 3D Blast, 1996. Yeah, that isometric one. Look, the 3D in the title was ambitious. It was trying to compete with the new consoles coming out, but the controls are slippery. The camera angle makes it really hard to judge jumps, and instead of running fast, you're walking around collecting little birds called flickies. But here's the thing. The flickies are a problem, sure, but my biggest issue isn't just the flickies, it's how dreadfully long each level takes. The levels seem to drag on forever. It's slow, it's clunky. This is pure D tier stuff. It's widely considered the weakest entry on the console. I mean, it's a fascinating failure because you can see what they were trying to do, but the execution just isn't there. It's the one game on this list that feels like a chore to play today. Bottom tier, no question. So, where does that leave us? Let's recap the full ranking so we can debate about it in the comments below. In the S tier, we have Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles, the combined lock-on version only. In the A tier, Sonic CD, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, and Sonic the Hedgehog 3, the standalone. At the B tier is Sonic & Knuckles, the standalone, the original Sonic the Hedgehog, and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. And for the C tier, we have Sonic Spinball. And at the bottom of the D tier is Sonic 3D Blast. It's funny to think about, right? Going back to these games today, that fear we all have, that magic is gone. It just doesn't apply here. When you start playing Chemical Plant or Ice Cap, it all comes rushing back. The sound from the Genesis audio chip, the challenge of trying to get all the Chaos Emeralds, the feeling of beating that final boss. They were the peak of 16-bit game design. And that's the real reason we're still talking about them all these years later. But I want to know where you stand. Did you have the lock-on cartridges as a kid, or did you play Sonic 3D and Sonic & Knuckles separately? How about Sonic CD? Should it actually be in the S tier? Let me know in the comments below. I really do read them all. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up for me and subscribe for a retro gaming break whenever you need it. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.